Hi, folks. Welcome back to Code and Concrete. I'm your host, Matthew Schneider, the CEO of Building Inc. Joining us today is Robert Orozco for a deep dive on AI agents. Robert was previously on episode 7. Thanks for taking the time to teach us more about this topic, Robert.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, glad to have you back. So we're going to keep this no BS, straight to the point. We're talking about AI agents today. Let's start with the basics. When people hear AI agent, it sounds like software that thinks and acts for you. But what's the cleanest definition that we can actually agree on?
So that's actually pretty much as close as what it is. If we all think of AIs, we think of the LLMs, the ChatGPTs, the Geminis, etc. Agents is basically the AI form of just saying API wrapper. It's how do we integrate these tools to take action directly on software that exists in the world. Write me an email and actually formulate the email on Gmail and get ready to send it. Those kind of extra steps that are the actionable steps are what separate an AI from an AI agent. So it really is. It's about what takes action on things. And now that we have a AI layer to reason and not have to hard code a lot of those decisions, that's why it's such a valuable tool.
So a lot of people are assuming what AI agents could do, but in practice, I think there's a lot of misconception. So what are things that people assume AI agents can do, but they really can't? Are we projecting too much intelligence on them?
Absolutely, at this current stage. AI agents are great, what I call like task-based artificial intelligence. It's really good in a very narrow scope. One of the problems we're still always dealing with is context windows. And so it's all about the amount of information it can retain at a given point in time and how effectively it can operate that. You can't just say, hey, AI agent, create me a whole company. It will lose scope, lose information, and not be able to keep up. But if you're saying, hey, I'm building an AI agent that specifically reads invoices that are coming in, like if we're getting an invoice and they're not in all the same format, if you don't want to hard code a technology that reads every single type of file that comes in and extracts the data and puts it in, it's a perfect use of an AI agent. It says, hey, I'm going to read this document. I'll understand what's going on in this document. I understand the context of that. I'm supposed to pull it out and put it into this billing system, and it can do that. And that's the perfect use of AI right now. I think right now people think it's a magic wand that will do everything. We're not quite there, but it is great for very narrow, focused, hyper-repetitive tasks that do require a more elevated level of thought or decision-making, which we didn't have before. Before it was very cumbersome to, code out every little odds and end and different reasoning that something would work. But now, if you have a general topic, you can really, create some great agents that can just take action for you.
Let's briefly define narrow AI versus broad or even general intelligence.
Well, so artificial general intelligence is a whole nother beast, right? That's the concept that we're going to create a human level intelligence that's comparable to us. We're not there, at least that I've seen, not publicly. Maybe DARPA has something, but from the, OpenAI models, Gemini, DeepSeek, we're not quite at general intelligence. When I say narrow, it's more task-based. We're actually seeing some great introductions of agentic AI into things like Firebase Studio. I don't know if you've had a chance to play with it. It's been out for about a week, but it looks almost like a VS Code instance. You plug in your Gemini API, and it will go in, read the context of your files while you're coding an application, and then make the changes to the files directly. So you're not even having to copy-paste code or make any changes. It will agentically go in, read a file, modify a file, allow you to see the errors and do any error corrections around those. And that's a huge value that we can do. And it's a very narrow scope. It's like, okay, we're building an app. It's in this little, one-dimensional interface that we're just trying to code with. And it has the ability to do those kind of reasonings and actions within that window. It's not like I'm going to say, hey, build me an integration to my connected house and then connect all of my IoT devices and do all of this. It's that would be too broad. But when you're focused on, hey, we're just building a one focused app, you can see the files, you can learn about the files, execute on them. It's a great example of agentic AI. And honestly, one of the most impressive that I've seen from a development perspective. I had a good friend. We've been trying to see how quickly we can go from idea to MVP. And with less than $100 of API credits, we were able to go from idea to a minimum viable product app within 24 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this leads me to the next question, which is what are AI agents surprisingly good at where they are surpassing their human counterparts rapidly?
So we're not actually seeing a ton of implementations publicly. The big focus has been, individuals building siloed ones. This is one of the most impressive ones I've seen is Firebase AI. I think they're getting much better at coding than people think. And I think part of that was the gap of refeeding information. Um, it really comes down to your design, whether you're going to have a good AI agent. And one of those things is constantly refilling its context window to make sure that it's fully aware of the actions it's supposed to take. People have this idea, you code it, you just let it run, and it just kind of knows and persists everything into the future. And that doesn't really work. I think I said if a lot of narrow scoped AI implementations I've seen great. Email generation. I've seen some implementations of AI assistants that have been fantastic because all it is integrating to a calendar, integrating into your Gmail, reading, making sure it's not adding an event during an overlap, etc. Very narrow scope. I've seen some great implementations of that.
Could you briefly define what a context window is and why this is sort of a blind spot for AI agents?
Oh, absolutely. So context windows are it goes back to the core concept of how AIs work. They take something called tokens, which more or less is just a word. And then what it does is it breaks out whatever message you're sending into those tokens, and those tokens get fed into an AI algorithm or an AI transformer, and then takes those and does the high dimensional matrix math and association that creates the reasoning and logic we understand for an AI as a whole. And so when it comes to context windows, it's not infinite in scale. We don't have the computers to handle an infinite scale context window. So what happens is there is a window for which it'll remember or it'll have these tokens in memory and process decisions around those tokens. And the problem is when you add new outputs and you add new inputs in that conversation, eventually that window will fall off and some of the core instructions you gave it will eventually disappear. And so what the best implementation of AI agents has been reintroducing that context in the conversation as you're going along. I think most people have experienced like after a time there's a drift, it stops remembering core details, etc. The best things I've seen for implementations of AIs is how can you compress that core information to as tightly as you can and then refeed it into the AI as you progress. There's a great developer out of New York who's building a tool that will actually go into your application and then map out all of the interconnectivities of the files and applications. So to say this function is used here, here, and here, this is used there. So if it ever tries to suggest a change, it now has that contextual reference in a very tight space that allows them, the AI, to keep that core information while it's still progressing forward.
Would this context window be applicable to an LLM like ChatGPT as well? And so
Oh,
when we
absolutely.
see the
Yeah.
little pop up that says memory updated, is that an instance of the window expanding?
Absolutely. So that's the big focus is more and more of the models are getting larger and larger context windows. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I believe ChatGPT 3 only had a context window of, I think, 50 to 100,000 tokens, whereas now we're in the category of 250,000 to millions, depending on the model you're using. And so that just says, hey, more information can be stored in my memory and processed as we're making these decisions. And so it's not perfect, and we haven't created a great way to have permanent memory. One of the things people, you always remember is that LLMs and the whole transformer concept is based on the human brain and how we think. And it was a coded version of how our brains work. And it doesn't quite have that permanent memory reference that's perfect to integrate back in. There's some work on that with using graph databases as parallel objects, things like that, but we're not quite there.
So if we compare this to humans briefly, how many tokens might a human brain have, roughly speaking, compared to artificial intelligence, just so that we can compare the memory capabilities of the two? Do you have a ballpark number for that?
I don't know if I would, but one of the challenges we have to remember is our eyes are 6K in data volume, right? So what we have is we always have a 6K data feed. That's two of them. So we're also getting a depth perception. We're also getting the temperature, the time of day with our circadian rhythm, of how we're standing based on your inner ear. So we have a much greater context window, but we have a much greater amount of data inputs at once. It'd be like if you were trapped in a box and all you can get was a little slit, that was a little piece of paper, and you can only read it. That's kind of what it's operating on. It doesn't really have eyes. You can send it a photo, but it still doesn't have the general context of like where it is, the time of day it is, even what country you're in. And that's why when you're formulating your prompts, it's very important to have like core critical detail information. I'm looking for a web app that has a lot of users, that is in this language, that is in this. Because I think there's a big gap for humans in that we assume a lot of basic information without realizing we assume a lot of basic information. Like when you go to work, you remember acronyms your companies use, you remember workflows your companies use. It doesn't know any of those kind of things intuitively, and it doesn't have that reference point that we don't even think about when we're asking questions. So I don't know if there's a good comparison because we just have so much more data coming in. And I think that's also why we're seeing AI is never quite as good as I think everyone wants and hopes it to be. It's just because I think people really forget that it's like we have so much more information coming to us at all times. And the scary part's when, the systems will eventually have that kind of data input, where they can stream video in and they can know the time and date from a call to the, internet or the time servers, etc. And that'll help contextualize and deliver better value.
Let's shift the focus to business novelty versus utility. So, a lot of people are asking if they can build AI agents for their workflows or business. But is this even the right question? And what should we be asking if we truly want to be productive with AI agents?
No, that's not the right question. This goes back to even the business intelligence days. It's not about automating a system. Is that system worth automating? Is there a clear business use case? I think there's a lot of AI tools that are being sold to everyone as if they can do everything, but that's because they're hammer salesmen and they want to paint everything as a nail. What really comes down to is, do you have a problem that could be addressed with this tool, and does it add value that would justify the expense and use? Tokens still cost money. They're actually extraordinarily cheaper than I remembered them being even a couple of years ago. I think right now, ChatGPT is only $1 to $2 per million tokens. So if you think about writing a 1,000,000-word paper, having it process that is probably going to be a couple dollars. It's been great in for cost. And so it comes down to, do you have a narrow, repetitive task that you're wasting human intelligence on, but it's a little too complicated to directly automate with some sort of scripting, right? There's too many small edge cases for you to cover all the little bases. That is a great use for an agentic AI. And if you can find those problems in your business, that is where you should work on deploying it. It is not a one-fits-all solution. It can do some great things, but also the big question is, do you have good data quality to begin with? Because as the, business intelligence saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. And so unless you have a really good structured process that you can fit this robot into, it's going to have more problems if you have a really murky, unclear business process with a lot of junk coming in and having to have it sort through those kind of things.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about multi-agent systems, which would be agents that work together. How do you actually get multiple agents to collaborate instead of just creating noise?
That's been a big challenge. One of the issues with agentic AI is, again, it's that narrow scope. It's very focused. One of the things I've been proposing quite recently is what I call directorial AI, which is an AI kind of abstraction layer that sits on top of an agent layer. And what it would do is act as almost a project manager, product owner, and create things like the Gantt. What sequence do things need to be built in? And then deploys vertically down to the agents that are more focused to it, saying, hey, I know that step C can't be done until agent 2 has completed step B. So it would then direct, hey, agent, go to this step, pause, agent C, build with these contexts of the information, whether that's function names, documents that have been created, processes that have been executed so far, and then transfer between it. But there's not a great infrastructure for passing information between. And again, it comes back to that same rolling context window problem. It's, you don't want to have one agent doing too much, because too wide of a breadth will make it unsure. It'll lose context. It'll make mistakes, and you'll have problems. You make it too narrow, it doesn't know what's going on around it, and it's not passing that critical data itself. And so I do think that we're going to start seeing directorial AIs pop up where it is the orchestra director, guiding each agent to the step that it needs to do and having that global scope, keeping that core information, and all its job is managing the individual agents and passing that information between. Right now, we haven't seen a great implementation of multi-agents working in tandem. You can see agents individually deploy across an organization focusing on their verticals, but having them work collaboratively has been a huge challenge.
I have an impromptu question, but you work in both of these industries. Do you see any interesting or opportunistic collaboration between AI agents and Web3?
Absolutely. We're actually one of the greatest ones I've seen was the Eliza AI, where it's creating AI chatbots that interact actually on like things like Twitter, and they're all Web3 based, and they're actually funded through crypto exchanges. So you're feeding the process of having these active agents, and I know they're working on integrations to go into apps. So eventually, you will tweet at an AI agent, say, "Hey, I want to order a pizza." And it will, using, APIs and integrations, funnel all the data information, fill out the little web form, and send you exactly what you're trying to do, and kind of removing that app layer that we've been really focusing on. So we're already seeing some really cool use cases of it implemented. I think that it's going to grow more and more. One of the biggest values for AI with blockchain is tracking data inputs. Because one of the problems we have with a lot of models is, you're seeing these threats of lawsuits with copyrighted material. And so, it kind of muddies the water if you've trained with one model with copyrighted information, you haven't trained another. So I think that we're going to see a lot of blockchain transactions tracking what data is used to train AIs. And that will drive a lot of value and security, saying, hey, listen, we know the information this was trained on. We can prove it, certify it. Here's the model output that is trained with authentic, but also trustworthy and legally cooperative data.
Absolutely. Attribution. I think that's a great use case. One of the things that building is looking at. So as a final question, directed towards our listeners, if they wanted to integrate an AI agent into their work or life today, what are some guiding principles that you would offer to them to avoid the hype and actually be productive?
Is this a repetitive task that I'm wasting a lot of time in? Is it relatively constrained? And do I need to know a ton of contextual information to understand it? And is it beneficial from a costing perspective? Is it cheaper to just pay someone, $10 an hour to work on this? Or is it something that would be worth paying a person to do? Because right now there's tons of implementations of agents, and a lot of them are failing purely because they're not bringing in clean data. There's not a clear scope of action. They don't know all the integrations and process flows. And if they can, and their implementations kind of crash and burn and they kind of blame the AI. But it really comes back to, did you have a good business intelligence layer already built into your business? If you've, been a BI focused company for a number of years, this is going to be a great time for you because you're going to be able to take a lot of those processes you've been building the understanding of and collecting the data for, and now you'll be able to act on them.
Absolutely. Well, that's great advice, Robert. And that brings us to the end of the AI agent segment. Wasn't that short and sweet?
No, I enjoyed it, man. Thank you for having me again.
Well, absolutely. And for anyone who enjoyed Robert's insight or Coding Concrete in general, if you could leave a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to, Spotify, Apple, or just a thumbs up on YouTube, we greatly appreciate that. Helps each and one of our guests that we have on to reach their target audience and helps the show grow as well. So thank you again, Robert, for jumping in to talk about AI agents today.
Anytime. Talk to you soon.